Bom dia a todos. Bem-vindos ao segundo dia do nosso seminário. Eu gostaria de agradecer a presença de vocês e, já para não perdermos muito tempo, anunciar a apresentação da professora Fiorenza Bellussi, da Universidade de Padova. Ao mesmo tempo, agradecê-la pela presença. Thank you very much for coming. A professora Fiorenza Bellussi, eu acho que dispensa a apresentação. Ela vem trabalhando com a questão dos distritos industriais italianos na Universidade de Padova. Já esteve com a gente várias vezes, no primeiro seminário também, ocorrido em 2006. E hoje vai tratar do tema Industrial District Evolutionary Trajectories, Localized Learning, Diversity and External Growth. Para quem quiser ouvir a tradução, há aparelhos lá na entrada. Ela vai falar em inglês. Professor Fiorenza, your time.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm sorry I can understand Portuguese because I'm Italian, so all the language has many Latin words and they're very clear for an Italian, but I cannot falar. So you are obliged to hear me in English. I could also speak in Italian, obviously, but that's the decision of the conference. And first of all, this is the second time I'm here, and I like to thanks very much the organizer, because for me it's an important opportunity to be in another country. It's so interesting as it is Brazil, and to work also more deeply together with other colleagues on the issue on which I'm specialized, which is the analysis of industrial district and cluster. And today I'm presenting a paper written with other two co-authors, which are my collaborators, my assistant, and together we try in this paper, which I synthesize in the slides that I will present today, we try to focus not on some traditional view of industrial district as an immodificable form, as a model ever presented and already fixed, but we have tried, using also a deep empirical analysis, to see the evolution of this model. So for this reason we titled the paper Evolutionary Trajectories, because we are interested in a kind of scientific way to see and to detach and to explore how model of aggregation called industrial district have evolved during time. And the main aim of the paper is so to introduce after the Marshall discovering of industrial district, which was a very old, was done nearly 100 years ago. It was the industrial district concept remained in one sense fixed as a form which characterizes some countries in a specific situation. But on the contrary, we have tried to approach historically the theme issue of the evolution of industrial district, trying to see how growth is introduced in this form, which are, in the modern time, the most frequent trajectories that we can see in the industrial district. We use not a statistical approach selecting cases and firms, but we use a meta-study approach. So we use a qualitative approach. And we were interested in understanding, let's say, polar cases. So for this reason, we selected the industrial district as an entity, and we use district on which our group or other people have written deep history of the evolution. For this reason, we think that we could really analyze also what is behind a questionnaire, an interview. This has been this analysis has been done on so-called secondary stories. Which are the important features on which we try to fix our attention? The first is the heterogeneity of the district, because in the idea of Marshall, you have, if you read let's say, tell you the story that Marshall and the people using this reference, you have an idea that there are some simple form, small, medium-sized firm, localized in a city town. They are like a big company spread in the territory, and you don't see the organizational issue, the strategy of the firm. You just see a fixed model. On the contrary, making this deeply analysis, we were able to show how big heterogeneity there is behind this model of aggregation. The heterogeneity comes from 4 elements. The first is the socioeconomic structure, which in one sense characterize the industrial district, the Italian industrial district, or the old British industrial district, from the so-called cluster model, which don't have the community, the population of firms, the identity in a kind of visible way. The second element is the strategy of the firms, including the degree of openness. The degree of openness is clearly an important element today in the process of globalization of industrial district. The third element is the learning mechanism, so the attitude of the firms localized there towards innovation. In fact, there is no just one model, one average level of innovativeness in industrial district or in cluster if you consider a kind of larger world that contains very identifiable form of localized system, or more dispersed regional or bigger form of aggregation. And there is no any average innovation element. In some districts are very innovative, then they stop. Some districts never became innovative, and the first there were just copying. In Brazil, having been in the seminar yesterday, I suppose that many firms in industrial districts are just copying the technology of other firms, are just adopted, or are non-innovating at all, as it come out from the questionnaire. So, I mean, it's very important to understand first if a firm is innovating or not, if it's innovating using some innovation already in the market, or if he's innovating because he's a Schumpeterian firm and he's able to produce new knowledge and to have some new ideas that they put in new products or in new processes. So, I mean, this distinguishes clearly in a strong way the different typologies of industrial district. And finally, the institutional environment, which considered in a larger sense, is also related to the belonging of a country, to the culture of a country, to institution of a country, to the so-called national system that has evolved during the time. Another important element is the presence of research institution. The research institution have been stressed by Porter when he was during the 80s discovering the industrial district model and applying to, let's say, the American context, and the presence of institutions which produce new knowledge, and the new knowledge which is transferred to firms, is clearly a strategic element, which was not at the time important when Marshall was writing about industrial district, so he never discuss about the importance of university, of institution, and so on. Finally, the third point is the role of external relationships. Here I summarize the issue considering the importance of firm networks. The industrial district is a network of firms, is a network of networks. is not just related to one big firm with a polar coordinator, but is a, let's say, is a chaotic, complex system. So you have local suppliers, customers, industrial district firms participate nowadays to global supply chains. They work for foreign firms or they are using foreign firms. So this could be passive or active. Networks assess can change a district. Firms can absorb new knowledge. Some districts and firms can have a high level of absorbing capability. Other firms can be internal to global chains, but in a way in which they don't change very much their knowledge base, their production, their strategy. Finally, what is important in my view nowadays is to see how industrial districts enter in the global division of labor. This can be studied considering how industries aggregate in different industrial districts, but how they give form to different models. One case which I've studied, which I think is very interesting, are the districts related to the production of plants. You have Netherlands, which is very important district, which take the first and the end of the value chain of the growing plant, so the science related to the production of new plants, new seeds, and the distribution channels, and then you have other districts which grow the plants. And so there is an interesting relationship between districts that are just manufacturing, so they are just growing plants, or districts that start to be able to relate with the client, to enter in the commercial nets and to build the commercial nets. And you can see a lot of changes around the world. For instance, a recent district that not well-known district I've studied is the district of cut roses in Kenya, which is near Lake Naivasha, and they are able to produce and to send to Europe more than 50 million of roses each year. And nowadays, this district, which now is organized also on the basis of larger leader firms, including some very important, is not only play the role of manufacturing district or the, let's say, satellite district, which just produce, but is also able to enter in the supply global chain. And recently, one local firm there, Ozerian, has bought one of the 4 auctions in Holland. So you can see they are starting to build science around the plants. You never imagine how scientific nowadays is the production of plants. It's like pharmacy. So you have a control of temperature, of sterilization of the area. You have sophisticated technologies applied to this production, which was in the past very traditional, very ancient. So going to the modern literature, we approach the idea of industrial district not just in looking only at how the model is, but how the model developed. Clearly, we try to, let's say, fuse, to match the literature on industrial district, which comes from the Marshallian story or from the Porterian story. We try to combine this literature with a new literature related to, for instance, to Gareffi, to political scientists, to American political scientists, which have studied the global supply chain and how global supply chain are interacting and are important in connecting countries and in connecting places. But the literature of the global supply chains, in one sense, dismiss the issue of autonomous endogenous growth of districts, while in the past, the literature of industrial districts has treated districts as self-sufficient models, as something which can be analyzed only internally, only with a lens, only there, something that is self-contained. And the message that I would like to launch in this seminar is that district are not self-contained anymore. And the more you look empirically the story of the evolution of industrial district, the more you see activities that are leaving the district for being subcontracted, delocated in low-cost countries. And on the contrary, you see also that in low-cost countries, the more dynamic firms are trying to capture knowledge through processes of knowledge offshoring, through creating links with the leader firm in other countries. So you see a lot of, there are a lot of connectivity that nowadays is breaking up the model. The main message of my talk today will be, first, that the history of self-contained model of industrial district or cluster is not anymore valid. Second, most importantly, this has a consequence that you must look at the multiple path dependency. So industrial districts that have a path dependency because there are a kind of organisms that grow. And so it's very important to understand the stages of growth, but there are no unique way of evolution. So we elaborate the concept from past place dependence to multiple path dependence. And we will, in the case I will present, I will show you how this can be analyzed. Clearly, the industrial district have a heavy tendency to build lock-in phenomena because they are based on a given territory, on given resources, then with the strategy of firms become capabilities. They are open to windows of opportunity because the evolution of industrial district of this organism is never done once in the story, but there are different moments or different strategies of firms that can change completely the evolution of the district. And clearly, what we are interested in is exactly the deviation from the old pattern. So we are interested to understand the point of changes, the triggering factors and evolution. How endogenous existing capabilities and resources has been developed at the beginning in the so-called genesis of the early period, and how subsequently there was an emergence of triggering factor of evolutionary factors. Well, let's start to see what we found about the initial condition that give rise to this model. Using our case studies, we found 4 important triggering factors. 3 of them are endogenous, and 1 is exogenous. It's open also the story to the territorial marketing, to the fact that some countries, even without resources, can start up a model of growth and so on. The 3 endogenous are, especially these are referred, my sample is referred to the Italian case, are ancient craft tradition. It's very important. You will see in the district I will mention. The second element, the second triggering factor are specific natural resources endowment. For instance, in the tanning industry, it was very important at the beginning to have a forest, to have a tannino, which was a product that was used to conciare le pelli, to, let's say, to pass from the production of the of leather. And the third element is the presence of an anchor firm. This is very important because in some districts, differently from the Marshall story, did not develop from the small size, but developed when large firms entering the territory started to be innovative, and then with the process of spin-off, it creates an industrial district. So the industrial district, these many examples that are in Italy, are initially created by the presence of a large firm that for different reasons fail, or he fails, he gives, he liberates knowledgeable potential entrepreneurs. If don't fail, it's build some capabilities that technicians and workers can use, creating a process of new firms. This process is clearly related to entrepreneurship, which is a very important element of all story of industrial districts. You cannot have industrial districts in area where there is not entrepreneurship, or where environmental condition stops the energy of people to create firms. The exogenous factor is the entry of multinational. In my sample, for instance, there is only one industrial district in the south of Italy, which ironically is the more science-based, the more advanced. It has been created by ST Microelectronics, a firm, Italo-French firm that entered in this area, in the Catania area, because probably the public policy provides some special help to have the industrialization of the area. So the firm used the support of the state and was localized, decided to relocalize there, and this after 20, 30 years, because this is the average on which you have the guarantee of the evolution of the model, you could have another 500, 600 firms which are specialized on activities related to the first firm that arrived. So the Catania Valley, which is the only really high-tech sector, was a district that was created from outside through an exogenous type of development. But these three endogenous factor and one exogenous factor are not the whole story, because once you have a triggering factor at the beginning in the kind of initial story of this life cycle, then you have more windows of opportunity for development. And you have another important series of factors which help you to explain the development. You have technological innovation. Some districts can generate Schumpeterian innovation. You have the activity of local public research organization with help firms to make innovation. You have the role of local institutions. In Italian districts, the most important local policy is not related to the things that we have been discussed yesterday, which is the provision of credit and so on, because this was, in one sense, a policy which was already there for all firms, but the industrial district generate themselves specific institutions, especially focus on vocational training and on the production of knowledge needed to the district. So you have, in the case of packaging machinery of Bologna, a Valeriani school, who provide not engineers, but qualified semi-engineers, technicians, which also were very good in understanding new machinery, because the policy of the strategy of the Valeriani school was to buy the new models and to ask the local firms to make courses to the new students. So there was really an important transfer of tacit knowledge and codified knowledge in the district. And this type of institutions are always there in the district that they've been developing during the time. Then you have local policy of the firms towards diversification or towards differentiation. You have districts that specialize themselves in cost leadership, so they introduce a lot of process innovation, but they didn't change very much the product. And in the case of when development is related to the modern time, you have two important factors, which are global competition, and internationalization. Internationalization means that firms are able to enter in foreign market through sending their technicians that open up new firms. So you have also a lot of small firms who open new foreign direct investment. Or you can have internationalization through global supply chain. The firm does not make a direct investment, but is working systematically with other partners outside. And global competition is the threat the foreign industrial district of foreign firms have in the 90s, have exacerbated through policy of cost reduction and competition through existing firms in industrial districts. There's in sectors like textile, clothing, footwear, and so on, Italian industrial districts suffer very much from China competition. This probably is also occurred in Brazil, even if the cost of labor in Brazil is much lower than the cost of labor in Italy. This story was dramatic for the surviving of firms in industrial districts specialized in traditional sector. And global competition, if you think about, was also the important story behind the failure of industrial district in Britain during the two wars. If you look at the documents, you can see that the really il colpo finale, the final battle was given to British industrial district by Asia, by Japan, and by Asian competitors. Lancashire district, I'm talking about the Lancashire district, and the footwear district existed in UK that disappeared without leaving a firm, just a desert. We hope that this will not be the story of Italian industrial district, even if clearly we have to accept that the globalization will cut dramatically the production, the low-cost production will be out of our Italian industrial district because the firms will not be able to be competitive with this type of product. But they can go up and they can try to improve to be still competitive in more added value activities. Which are the cases that I investigated? You can see that I have a very interesting variety. I have fashion-led districts like Sport System of Montebelluna. I have a footwear district of Riviera del Brenta. Interesting, this district has been studied also by Schmitz when he was giving us the important he was providing an important book, which was the result of an important international research, and he was very pessimistic about the footwear Riviera Brenta because he saw a kind of degrading of functional degrading, because the local firms were producing not anymore with an autonomous commercial net, but they were producing through being a subcontracting of important fashion firms. But the knowledge of the district was so sophisticated there that the district will survive, even in what Schmitz will call a degrading mechanism. You have a strategic improvement of knowledge on design, and the district is still surviving, but in a kind of condensed form, because if you work on high fashion, if you produce shoes that are costing to the final client 500 euros, clearly you don't have a mass market. Then other districts are placed in lower segments, like footwear. Footwear in Verona is producing average quality shoes, but it's still very alive, it's still very dynamic, and he has delocalized a lot. So the production In the old district, the production is only on prototype, a small series, small batches, while the mass production nowadays is produced in firms in Romania, which are now Italians, which are directed by Italians, and someone is saying that Timișoara is becoming the seventh province of the Veneto region, because in that area now everyone speaks Italian. You can find only Italian restaurants, as I found going there interviewing firms. Then you have a Eightware district, which is in Belluno, in the mountains, in the Veneto region, and this district has given rise to an important firm, Luxottica, which nowadays is a multinational. It's an important firm who has recently bought a very big chain in the United States for the distribution of glasses, and to face the competition of Chinese, they decide to block strategically the distribution. So at this point, Chinese don't have shops buying their glasses, because the shops are in the hands of Italians, which produce glasses. So so you see how sophisticated are the strategy of firms. And Luxottica now is a multinational, and this investment was possible because he decided to be quoted in a stock exchange of New York. With the money that the Americans provide to Luxottica, she bought the eyeglasses chain. Another important district which I analyze is the Arzignano. The Arzignano is a district related to tanning, to the producer of leather, and this is a very ancient district. And this district also is still alive, suffering a little bit because all the production, all shoes are now, and all production of leather are now done in China, and there is no anymore a big market in Europe. But the interesting things, the good quality leather is still demanded and bought in Arzignano, near Vicenza, and then sent to China to be manufactured. Obviously, globalization was a terrible threat to these firms, and some of them, the bigger, are now producing leather in Brazil or in China. Few of them, because another strategy which I found existing in the Italian industrial district was that one of inverse delocalization. So instead of sending capital in low-cost labor countries, Arzignano is importing low labor from low-cost countries. So this is a kind of interesting strategy, which is, in classical terms, is you have two equilibria. You can send capital or import labor, but from a social point of view, this is you have totally different results, because you have a lot of social problems if you import 5,000 workers, which are from Indonesia, from Africa, and so on, and you put them in a place where there are 2,000 inhabitants. You can see how this is changing completely the district. On the other side, this, from a Canadian point of view, is maintaining the revenue in the area, and so is, in one sense, a policy which is related to the growth of the local GNP. Then we analyze also medium teach district, furniture in Brianza, in Lombardy. So far, the producer of leather sofa in south of Italy, which is one of the most important districts in south of Italy, around Matera, and a small district which I study, ornamental horticulture in Saonara, which I study in comparison with the Holland box shop. This special case will be out in a journal, Urban Studies, in the next months. So this district, the first district I mentioned, they had as OECD will consider low-tech. Then you don't have any more just low-tech districts. You have low-tech districts, but you can have knowledge-intensive firms. But there are districts so-called traditional. Then you have a medium-tech district because machinery is very important and because there is a lot of technology behind, which are sectors with, let's say, average medium level of R&D expenditures. And then you have the high-tech districts when, in the OECD definition, you have a lot of R&D expenditures and probably a lot of patent. In my sample, there is a biomedical district of Mirandola in Emilia-Romagna. This was a district which grew around the Anchor firm. And this district in biomedical is a district that developed with an idea of an entrepreneur, Dr. Veronesi, who produced the first machinery for dialysis in Italy, low-cost machinery. Then he sold this low-cost machinery to all Italian hospitals, and then and it changed also the medical procedure because at that point dialysis was possible in all hospitals in Italy. And after a while, this market was so interesting that multinational came in the district. So the exogenous factor came in the development phase. So multinational entered in the district after the district was developed. And then you have the district I quoted before of Catania Valley of microelectronics, ST built around ST microelectronics, and then you have a packaging machinery in Bologna. You can see here quickly that the size and the number of firms, when we are talking about the evolutionary trajectory, we talk about let's say, a scheme of life cycle of the districts, which allowed you to see the average size of the district, something like 1,000 firms and something like 10,000, maximum 25,000 employees. This is typical of Italy. District life cycle. There is apparently homogeneous life cycle of formation, development, maturity, decline, a renewal of the district. But behind this homogeneity of life cycle, as I will show now, there are very different trajectories of development. How you define life cycle? This was a question that they asked also in Druid 2 months ago when I presented this paper. We define life cycle in a very strict and rigid sense. The life cycle, growth, maturity, decline, is referred to the number of firms and the number of employees. So when the district is growing, it means that the number of firms and the number of local employees is growing. The maturity is when in the same years you don't have any more growth in firms or in employment. This must be clearly adapted to the local situation, because when you have a very big phenomena of delocalization, you have that the output, the sales are the same, but local employment decrease because increase outside employment. But you need to balance these things and to consider these things. But clearly, decline is decline in number of firms, in number of employees. Renewal is when you can see that the district change completely and as a kind of second life. Particularly 2 districts are here in the decline on renewal, and it's interesting to see the difference. They are very traditional, they are specialized in traditional sectors. You have clothing in Val Vibrata, decline, which is not only because delocalization, but you have also a crisis of firms and the decline of the number of firms. On the contrary, as I tried to show you, in footwear of Riviera del Brenta, which is near Venice, which was a district that in the perspective, theoretical perspective of the IDS people was declining, but in a new perspective, some years later in my analysis, it came out that it was in fact a renewal, because they changed completely in a big capture rate, in a big crisis of having a Chinese firm competing dramatically on that type of shoes. They changed completely the shoes they were producing, and they started to become subcontractors of Valentino, Louis Vuitton, and so on. And so the district survived. And in the second also analysis that I've done after the analysis of Roberto Rabellotto, I discovered that the old firms that were just subcontracting for the brand, famous brand of Alta Moda, they were now trying to have the small market with their production. So it means that they have learned how to deal with fashion, and they start to go back to their competence, to use their competence and their network of the commercial networks, and they try again to be autonomous. So it's a kind of a capability that remain hidden and then come up later on. So when a district has some capabilities, they don't disappear. They are simply, let's say, put in a store. They are stored and they are reused in different conditions. Finally, the important discussion, the important element that we were discussing in this paper, and if you want the deep analysis of the evolutionary factors, you see how for each district the analysis could be has been based on the reading of research that some of us have done or we have just collected. You see how many different factors can be considered elements of growth and elements of the evolutionary trajectory, which I don't mention, but I have the paper, so if someone is interested. Also, you can download the paper because it's been presented in Druid. The Druid has an open web, so all papers presented, you don't need any code to go to the paper presented and accepted in Druid conference, summer conference. This is the schematic representation of my analysis. You see the important factor at the beginning, at the origin, the development triggering factor, which are technological innovation, cost leadership, local institution, demand, growth, internalization, and the maturity. And you can see that if you see, you can also find out the most important, for each phases, the most important factor. In the origin, in the Italian case, ancient craft tradition were the most popular, the most common factor. In the phase of development, you can see that local institution and demand growth were the most important triggering factors. Demand growth, by the way, you can see from the years of development of the Italian industrial district were collocated after the Second World with the European Union market, with a very important element often not considered of the growth of industrial district model is the constitution, the formation of the European market, which increased the market for the local firms, which allows firms to generate the scale economies to increase the market. Local institution, as I said, vocational training, a specific center for research, either based on the local association of artisan or elsewhere. And in the case of maturity, the most important factors are global competition and internationalization. But they are, at the same time, mechanisms which treat the development and the surviving of industrial districts, but they are also mechanisms that force them to evolve into a globalized model. So there are no just simple recipe, there are no just unified trajectories, but each industrial district has chosen different solutions, and these different solutions are evolved during time. Concluding, this cross-case analysis identified the factors important in the development. The presence of the specific triggering factor at the origin did not generate a standardized growth. So in one sense, there is no past dependence. Each phase can be changed with a new factor can give new growth to the industrial district analyzed. We identify multiple path dependency, which put together the elements I show. And finally, market globalization and internationalization emerged as the most important factor at the actual time, in the contemporary time, as increasing the chance either to rapidly develop, internationalize, and became like a small multinational for industrial district, or on the contrary, they give rise to a sudden stop of the model. Thanks.
Thank you very much, professor. Bom, agradeço a apresentação da professora Fiorenza. Eu acho que uma apresentação que tratou de casos de aglomerações industriais na Itália em diferentes níveis de evolução, com diferentes graus de conteúdo tecnológico, e essa análise, através dos casos, acho que suscita uma série de questões para um debate, mas que eu proponho que as questões sejam encaminhadas após a apresentação do segundo palestrante do dia de hoje. Eu peço desculpa, não tinha apresentado desde o início, mas acho que foi um pouquinho pego pela pressa do atraso. Desculpe, Danilo. O professor Danilo Camargo Igliori trabalha no departamento de Land Economy da Universidade de Cambridge e também é professor aqui na Faculdade de Economia e Administração. Divide seu tempo entre Inglaterra e Brasil. E também tem estudado muito essa questão dos clusters industriais, mas hoje vai tratar especialmente de um tema bastante pertinente do ponto de vista da nova economia, podemos chamar assim, que é a questão das indústrias criativas no Brasil. Eu imagino também fazendo contraponto com a realidade mundial. Então, eu passo a palavra ao professor Danilo e depois, então, antes do intervalo, a gente abre para uma sessão de debates. Tudo bem? Obrigado, professor, por ter vindo.
Bom dia a todos. Obrigado, Amato. É um prazer vir falar na Poli pela primeira vez. Desde que eu voltei para o Brasil, comecei a voltar para o Brasil, a gente tem tentado aproximar o Departamento de Economia com engenharia de produção. Tenho amigos aqui, conheço o trabalho do Renato há mais de 10 anos. Então, é um grande prazer, primeiro, pessoal, né, de estar aqui falando um pouco das minhas pesquisas para vocês. Segundo, é um prazer pela natureza do tópico, que eu vou contar um pouco por que eu estou mexendo com isso, mas na essência do que é chamado de indústrias criativas, está uma fusão entre ciência e arte, ou, se vocês quiserem, engenharia, né, e artes plural. Né. Então, acho que aqui acho que o interesse no Brasil está sendo inicialmente puxado mais para o setor artístico, mas já dá para ver que o pessoal das engenharias está metido nisso e não tem como sair, como eu vou tentar convencer vocês. Eu vou querer, acho que não vou conseguir ficar sentado. Posso pegar um?
Tem microfone lá.
Alô? Então, o título, na verdade, eu não tenho um paper que tem esse título. Esse é um título da apresentação para vocês pensarem um pouco em duas coisas que eu vou enfatizar. Eu sou um economista mais ligado a questões espaciais, mas que gosta de coisas setoriais também. Tem vários estudos setoriais explorando questões espaciais. Então, o que eu quero mostrar e o que eu quero explorar é essa relação entre as indústrias criativas e a manifestação delas no espaço, principalmente olhando para metrópoles e dinâmicas metropolitanas, né? E aí eu queria, depois vamos fazer algumas considerações sobre o Brasil. É interessante fazer essa apresentação depois da apresentação da professora, porque ela falou bastante, né, com bastante riqueza, de uma realidade que tipicamente está ligada a pequenas e médias cidades, né, e atividades industriais. Eu vou usar muitos dos elementos teóricos e analíticos que ela usou, né, porque essa também é a minha escola, vamos dizer assim, mas para explorar grandes espaços, grandes cidades, em cima de um setor de setores de serviços, né, que são e serviços bastante modernos e avançados, que de uma forma ou de outra está muito conectado com o que se faz nos distritos, porque, como vocês vão ver aqui. Amado, você controla o meu tempo, eu tenho uma apresentação enorme, e eu posso ficar falando horas aqui, então vai controlando o meu tempo, mas basicamente eu tenho 5 tópicos, né, um bem curto, só para mostrar como é que eu penso, né, quais são os elementos que estão na minha cabeça ao fazer as análises, que é em cima da teoria das aglomerações. Depois eu quero especular um pouco com vocês por que indústrias criativas é algo importante e merece atenção e, na verdade, tem um potencial enorme para frente. É interessante porque, em departamentos de economia, quando você fala que você está mexendo com indústrias criativas, é difícil conseguir uma reação entusiasmada, né? Eles acham que você está querendo fazer algo light, né? Está virando poeta, tal. Então, vou mostrar que isso é bem longe, o caso é bem diferente. Bom, aí eu vou apresentar um resumo de um trabalho que foi publicado, então foi quando comecei a mexer com essas coisas, que é um trabalho econométrico, né, tentando explorar dinâmica do emprego em indústrias criativas e localização no UK, que é um país que está muito avançado nessas coisas, né, tanto do lado de resultados das atividades, em coisas bem palpáveis como produto e emprego, como por já ter um esforço institucional de políticas públicas incentivando o setor bem à frente da maioria dos países. Bom, aí eu quero mostrar para vocês só algumas explorações preliminares sobre o que está acontecendo no Brasil, né? Então, só para falar um pouco do meu envolvimento com esses temas, eu fiz esse trabalho para o UK, comecei em 2002, foi publicado em 2007 num livro que eu vou mostrar para vocês, e aí parei. Aí voltei para o Brasil e comecei a ver o interesse aqui está crescendo, né? Tanto por parte de governos, como parte de empresas e academia também. Então, muito recentemente, eu comecei a olhar para os dados no Brasil, né? Comecei a conversar com pessoas que já estão mexendo nisso, e vou mostrar para vocês só alguns dados para vocês terem uma primeira ideia, e aí eu finalizo especulando um pouco sobre a dimensão de política pública dessa história toda. Bom, se a gente pegar todo tipo de literatura que envolve economia espacial, economia das aglomerações, desenvolvimento local, APLs, clusters, distritos industriais, polos tecnológicos, a diversidade e a riqueza da literatura é imensa. Se você quiser, pode voltar lá no Adam Smith, capítulo 3, especialização dada pelo tamanho de mercado, passa pelo Marshall e tradição germânica, é um mundo, né? Se você tentar ser o mais compacto possível em pensar no que tem de mensagem importante em toda essa riqueza, eu, de uma forma um pouco ambiciosa, digo que a gente pode olhar para esse gráfico. Esquece o que está escrito aqui, essa é uma versão dinâmica, quero que vocês pensem primeiro numa versão estática. Pensa aqui no eixo vertical como qualquer medida de bem-estar, qualidade, desempenho de uma localidade. Pode ser uma vila, pode ser um bairro, pode ser uma cidade de média, uma cidade enorme, um estado, dependendo da sua análise. E aí você bota aqui alguma medida de performance. Emprego, IDH, PIB, alguma coisa que meça o bem-estar, o nível de desenvolvimento de uma cidade, de uma localidade. E aqui coloca a densidade e alguma medida de tamanho. Tá? Pode ser população por área, alguma coisa que meça o tamanho da aglomeração. O que você vê aqui é que as cidades bem pequenas tendem a ter esse nível de bem-estar menor, e conforme ela vai crescendo, por causa de economias de aglomeração, que são geradas por várias causas, né? A professora explorou algumas delas, começa a ter benefícios com isso. Essas economias de aglomeração são auto-reforçantes, né? Efeito bola de neve, elas geram mais prosperidade, um círculo virtuoso, e a economia começa a crescer, começa a se desenvolver. Só que a um certo momento, né, dada a infraestrutura, dados os recursos naturais, dadas as instituições, dados outros atributos quaisquer da região, que varia região para região, você começa a ter efeitos de congestionamento. Né, você começa a ter o que a gente chama de externalidades negativas. Né. E então você vê aqui, essa curva cresce, mas cresce a taxas decrescentes e tem uma situação de um ótimo, né, um tamanho ótimo que a gente possa pensar para essa aglomeração. E aí, quando começa a decair, e pode chegar num certo momento que eu tenho um bem-estar negativo, está muito congestionado. Acho que quem mora em São Paulo entende bem essa ideia que eu estou querendo dizer aqui. O resumo é, qualquer que seja o lugar que você esteja olhando, você pode tentar identificar, né, como é que essas forças positivas de aglomeração e negativas de congestionamento se encontram e que tipo de resultado ela gera em termos de uma ocupação do espaço e uma performance econômica específica do lugar. Tá? É esse tipo de arcabouço que eu tenho na minha cabeça, inicialmente. Se você quer estudar, quando você olha para as paisagens econômicas, para a distribuição espacial de atividade econômica e populações, você vê que existe um sistema urbano bastante diversificado. Né? Cidades pequenas, médias, grandes, enormes, extremamente grandes. Mais conectadas, menos conectadas. Num jeito muito simples de olhar para o que está acontecendo, é pensar que os tamanhos das cidades, né, de alguma forma, estão relacionados com o mix produtivo que tem ali dentro. Então, vou explorar um pouco mais isso, mas, via de regra, né, a gente pode pensar que nas grandes cidades, estou simplificando algumas coisas, depois vocês podem me criticar, tá? Mas nas grandes cidades, tipicamente, o que mais prospera são setores em que eu tenho tecnologias não consolidadas, setores novos que se beneficiam muito de inovações radicais, seja lá como é que defina isso, e que, portanto, pagam o preço de estar no centro, no epicentro das ideias, onde o conhecimento flui de diversas formas, flui dentro de setores, flui entre setores, e onde estão os grandes centros de pesquisa também. Setores mais maduros, né, passam a não ter tanto benefício desse contexto mais turbulento, e aí tendem a migrar para cidades menores, onde, se eles estiverem aglomerados em torno de uma cadeia de valor, em torno de um setor, você pode ter oportunidade de se beneficiar por externalidades à la Marshall, bem explorado, como é o caso dos distritos industriais italianos. O meu ponto aqui, para entrar em indústrias criativas, é que tem uma ligação forte entre dinâmicas tecnológicas e industriais e o seu rebatimento sobre a dinâmica espacial. Não tem como entender dinâmica espacial sem olhar dinâmica industrial e tecnológica, e vice-versa, também é verdade. Bom, então foi uma pequena introdução de economia espacial. Vocês podem me perguntar qualquer coisa a respeito depois. só para a gente falar por que eu vou olhar para indústrias criativas com essa lente, né, de geografia, de economia espacial. Antes de eu passar para o meu trabalho mais específico e dar alguns exemplos do caso inglês, deixa eu explorar um pouco com vocês o que está por trás do que a gente chama de indústrias criativas, o que está por trás disso e qual é o interesse. Né? Indústrias criativas é outro nome bastante complicado, da mesma forma que clusters. 10 anos atrás comecei a estudar clusters, gastei um ano lendo, tentando entender o que era, quais eram as definições que existiam, quais as diferenças e semelhanças entre elas. Acho que estou com esperança de que nas indústrias criativas isso não vai ser tão agudo, mas já vi que tem um debate, que existem nomes diferentes, alguns chamam de economia criativa, alguns reduzem, chamam de economia da cultura. É difícil de definir o que é criatividade, é difícil definir o que não é criatividade. Os não criativos reagem e dizem, não, nós somos criativos. Então, tem um debate conceitual que eu não vou entrar muito agora, mas tem um elemento que ninguém disputa e que eu acho que é muito interessante, que é a indústria criativa, ela surge da força da união entre ciência e artes. Eu vou falar bastante de design agora, mas a ideia é lugares em que eu tenho indústrias criativas importantes, percebe-se um incentivo não só para a ciência, mas também para a arte, bastante sistemático. Né? Por que o espaço, só para ir colocando espaço nessa história, por que o espaço é interessante? Por que as cidades são particularmente interessantes? Porque, para quem acredita em interação face a face, tacit knowledge, transmission, e fluxo de ideias, as cidades são os lugares onde encontros entre artes e ciência acontecem de forma mais fácil. Tá? Bom, o conceito fundamental para entender indústria criativa é o conceito de design. Né? E aqui design tem que ser pensado da forma mais ampla possível. Né? Que tipo de... Só para a gente botar... de quem que eu estou falando aqui? Né? Estou falando desde os designs de coisas mais tradicionais, móveis, né? Moda, né? Produtos de consumo em geral, né? Até música, né? Composição de música, pode pensar como um design inicial gera uma música, toda a parte de artes em geral, e mais recentemente softwares, né? Jogos, games de computador, né? Qualquer tipo de aplicativo no computador, automóveis, né? Desenho de automóveis, peças de automóveis, peças em geral, né? Tem uma conexão forte de design. Né? Então, a ideia de design como um produto, né? É o centro da indústria criativa. Se desenhar algo é o que você vende, eu posso dizer que você está no meio de um grupo de setores que fazem parte das indústrias criativas. Né? O mais importante para a nossa história aqui é que, se você tem design como produto, no fundo você tem inovação como um produto. Né? Vocês aqui na poliprodução, gente na economia, a gente sempre, quando começa a estudar inovação, a gente fala assim, existe inovação de processo ou inovação de produto. Né? Nas indústrias criativas, no mundo do design, a inovação é o produto. Né? Ninguém vende design que foi feito ontem. Né? Um design que tem valor é algo que é novo por definição. Né? Isso vale para qualquer um dos setores que normalmente são incluídos na indústria de indústrias criativas. Né? E nem que seja fazer, por exemplo, uma peça de teatro de novo. Pega um Shakespeare e remonta. Tem um novo design. Impossível fazer exatamente igual. Bom, por que eu entrei nessa história? Né? Como eu falei, eu venho de uma formação de economia espacial, porque quando você vai olhar para a distribuição dessas atividades, você vê que elas estão extremamente concentradas e mais concentradas em grandes cidades. O que não significa que não exista em cidades menores, né? Mas pega indicadores de emprego, você vai ver que elas estão bem concentradas. Bom, último tópico nessa uma espécie de uma especulação, uma exploração conceitual aí da ideia de indústrias criativas é o papel da diversidade. Tem um debate muito grande, né? E brasileiros gostam de achar que nossa diversidade gera criatividade, por sua vez gera felicidade. Mas esse é um debate em aberto, né? Então, indústrias criativas, algumas pessoas falam, por que Londres é tão forte? Porque Londres é uma cidade extremamente diversa culturalmente. Por que Nova York é tão forte? Porque Nova York é uma cidade muito diversa culturalmente. São Paulo seria um ótimo lugar se isso fosse verdade, e de fato não, São Paulo é um bom lugar, não sei se isso é verdade. O Brasil seria um ótimo lugar, né? As metrópoles brasileiras estão transbordantes de diversidade. O fato é difícil mostrar que diversidade gera criatividade, né? Nem que sim, nem que não. E essa é uma área de pesquisa interessante. Bom, deixa eu mostrar alguns fatos. Antes de mostrar alguns fatos, deixa eu só explorar um pouco características gerais. Os setores são muito diversos, né? Engenharia de design para peças de automóveis requer um conjunto de skills e ativos. Design de moda requer outro conjunto, por mais que existam interfaces, né? Mas se você olhar para esses setores, é interessante que você percebe algumas características marcantes. Então, a primeira coisa é, design não tem a ver, por mais que em algum momento você tenha produtos em massa, para a indústria do design funcionar bem, eu preciso ter produtos diferenciados, né? Produtos de massa geram um design a cada 100 anos, exagerando. Então, produtos diferenciados naturalmente estão ligados com nichos de mercado, né? E que cada vez mais se proliferam, e, portanto, com desintegração vertical, né? Tudo isso junto, tirando essa questão aqui de imagem, o que a gente vê é que as indústrias criativas dão um espaço considerável para pequenas e médias empresas em atividades intensivas em alto capital humano e bem remuneradas. Num mundo um pouco selvagem, talvez. Mas alguém me aponte um pedaço aí do mercado que seja menos selvagem. De qualquer forma, é interessante. Pega engenharia de design de automóveis, né? Grandes empresas são os players iniciais, são quem produzem os automóveis, desenham os automóveis. Todas as grandes empresas têm seus departamentos de design incorporados na empresa, mas, como a gente estava conversando aqui antes da apresentação, esse departamento não é suficiente para a necessidade de design que as empresas têm. Então, eles contratam designers de fora. É um consultor sozinho? É. É uma pequena firma? É também. São enormes firmas de design? Também. Então, existe uma composição, né, de atores diferentes, agentes diferentes que entram nesse mundo, e muitos deles são pequenos, né? Se você andar em Cambridge, você encontra alguns dos designers que são one-man band, ganhando bem, vivendo felizes e conectados nas maiores empresas do setor. Muito bem. Vou falar um minuto sobre esse cara que é famoso. Acho que ele é um sociólogo, que diz o seguinte: se você quer olhar para indústrias criativas, você tem que olhar dentro dos países em 3 dimensões: talento, tecnologia e tolerância. Talento e tecnologia foi o que eu estava conversando agora, né? E tolerância, essa ideia da diversidade, não necessariamente diversidade cultural, mas diversidade de ideias, né? O aceite de diversidade de ideias. Bom, isso aqui ficou bastante polêmico, as ideias são simples, né? Mas porque ele usou, de alguma forma, que eu não sei qual, ele construiu medidas dessas 3 coisas e pegou os 45 países e construiu um ranking de criatividade. Italy is not there, I'm afraid. E o Brasil está lá embaixo. Então, é isso que eu quero mostrar, como as coisas são controversas nesse mundo, né? Esse cara é super famoso. Mas é exatamente isso que eu imagino, né? A tolerância pesou aí. Você vê um monte de país tolerante aí, agora não sei tanto em relação ao resto. De qualquer forma, é curioso, né, porque tem o complemento desse ranking é o seguinte: o Brasil está em 43º lugar, mas são só 45 países que foram entrevistados. Então o Brasil ficou na frente de Peru e Romênia e atrás de um monte de gente aí que a gente conhece e que não necessariamente a gente imaginaria que fossem mais criativos que a gente. Nós estamos tão ruins assim? Numa primeira análise, eu acho que não. Eu acho que tem algum problema com esse ranking. Acho que a Itália também devia estar mais elevada no ranking, mas não tem um outro ranking para oferecer. Então a gente tem que pensar nele de alguma forma. Então deixa eu mostrar alguns números das indústrias criativas na Inglaterra. Como é que eu estou de tempo, Ivan?
Mais 15 minutos, né?
Tá. Então deixa eu dar uma corridinha. Bom, deixa eu só mostrar algumas coisas para dizer que isso é importante. Meus números são um pouco desatualizados, mas é só para mostrar que não estou falando de algo que é nada, assim, meia dúzia de pessoas, né? Então, só olhando para a Inglaterra, uns 10 anos atrás, os setores que a gente colocava como indústrias criativas eram 5% do PIB, ou do PNB, e isso cresceu com certeza de lá para cá. Estou falando em coisas de centenas de bilhões de dólares em termos de receita, né? Estou falando já de exportação de serviços, que é um negócio interessante, né? E crescimento de emprego. Peguei 97 e 98, porque é um ano que várias coisas aconteceram em termos de indústrias criativas. O setor cresceu 16%, comparado com 6% da economia inglesa inteira, né? Londres, que é a grande, Londres ou o sudeste inglês, né, a área em torno de Londres, é a grande capital disso. Então, metade dos empregos estão ali em volta de Londres, né, e o setor já recebeu um reconhecimento oficial, né, e entrou, né, no que eles chamam de London Core Business, né. Entre 95 e 2000, nós estamos falando da segunda maior fonte de crescimento de emprego, a segunda maior segunda maior em termos de produto e o terceiro em termos de empregos totais na cidade. Tá? Então, não é nada insignificante. Essa é a agência de desenvolvimento que criaram em Londres. Eu acho que vale muito, quem tiver interesse nessas coisas, vale a pena entrar no site, e que eles mostram como é que eles estão fazendo para aproximar cientista de artista, né, e principalmente para montar um arcabouço institucional que permita networking, permita fluxo de informação, e tem funcionado relativamente bem. Bom, eu tenho 15 minutos, eu vou pular bastante desse trabalho, mas eu quero só mostrar, menos agora, 10 minutos, eu só quero mostrar o que eu fiz na Inglaterra e o que eu estou pretendendo começar a fazer aqui no Brasil. A ideia aqui era simplesmente pegar, montar uma especificação empírica, econométrica, para tentar estudar se aglomeração produtiva, né, e outros controles geraram um maior crescimento em indústrias criativas usando a metodologia de econometria espacial. Eu vou pular, vou passar bem rápido disso. Isso aqui tem um paper, se alguém tiver interesse, me fala, eu passo para vocês o paper. Mas, basicamente, o que a gente fez foi olhar para dados de emprego nessas indústrias, então software, arquitetura e engenharia, publicidade, fotografia, cinema e televisão, rádio e até criação artística e literária. A gente juntou todo o emprego em todos esses setores, chamou de indústrias criativas, e olhamos para um nível geográfico bastante desagregado, 408 unidades na Grã-Bretanha. Aqui é só simplesmente a distribuição do emprego, né? Você vê Londres, essa região aqui. E aí olhamos apenas para o crescimento do emprego em pequenas e médias empresas, né, entre 91 e 2000. E a ideia aqui era ver, será que lugares que tinham mais emprego nessa área cresceram mais? Será que lugares que eram maiores, mais densos, cidades, cresceram mais? Né? Qual é o papel do capital humano nessa história? E, então, para encurtar e mostrar um pouco do Brasil, a gente pega evidência de tudo isso. Tá? Então, vou poupar vocês da econometria. Deixa eu acabar minha coisa falando um pouco do Brasil. Então, Brasil, já tem algumas pessoas trabalhando nisso. Eu comecei a levantar dados e é bastante difícil, né, definir os setores. Então, o que eu fiz, assim, num primeiro exercício, foi olhar para a nossa velha e boa raiz, que eu tenho dados de emprego formal, por uma desagregação de setores razoável, e tentei olhar para o que está acontecendo em alguns desses setores que a gente poderia chamar de indústria criativa, nas principais regiões metropolitanas de São Paulo, entre 1995 e 2005. Então, o que eu quero mostrar para vocês aqui agora alguns dados. Esse é Recife. Tá? Aqui está ruim, deixa eu falar as cores. Né? O verde, que é arquitetura e engenharia. Né? Quando dizem que está faltando engenheiro no mercado, é verdade. Vocês devem estar sofrendo uma pressão para soltar mais alunos por aí. O azul claro é edição, cinza... Não, desculpa. O azul claro é publicidade, cinza, fotografia, marrom, claro, rádio, vermelho, teatro, música e outras atividades. Aí o amarelinho ali é cinema. Então, vou passar só para vocês darem uma olhada, ter um feeling disso aí. O que a gente percebe é que todas as regiões metropolitanas, ou essas 5 maiores que eu olhei, você pode ter alguns sustos, mas você vai ver tendência crescente em todas. Alguns segmentos, como o rádio, por exemplo, não crescem. Eu tenho uma tabela de tudo isso daí. O que está crescendo bastante é arquitetura e engenharia, nesse grupo que eu tenho, né, na maioria das cidades. Agora, olha São Paulo. Publicidade é o que mais cresce. Né? Essa é uma coisa interessante. Pega um subsetor de indústrias criativas. Né? Por que não tem publicidade em todas as... Você tem, né? Mas tem muito menos. Né? Azulzinho claro. Né? Em alguns casos cai. Né? São Paulo, você pega um crescimento razoável do setor de publicidade. Bom, se você juntar 5, né, o que você vê, isso é uma figura bem, nos últimos 10 anos, um crescimento bem razoável, né, da maioria dos setores dinâmicos, tirando o rádio, que fica, de fato, praticamente estável, mas não decresce. Né, nós temos o surgimento e crescimento da internet entre 1995 e 2005. O rádio não cresce, mas não decresce. Temos de emprego, né? Bom, aí para acabar, eu fiz ali era uma visão geográfica. O que eu fiz aqui é o contrário. Olha setor por setor e vê onde é que ele está entre as 5 regiões metropolitanas. Então, amarelo é São Paulo, cinza é Rio, azul claro é BH, o marrom aqui embaixo, Salvador, o verde, e Recife é o de baixo. Com publicidade, fica bem claro onde é que está, né? Fotografia. Cinema e vídeo. Olha o Rio de Janeiro, é feito Globo. O rádio é muito também São Paulo e Rio. Artes e literatura, você vê uma figura mais distribuída. Isso dá para pensar algumas coisas de política. Se você acredita que um setor de design forte depende de um setor de artístico forte. Bom, isso aqui não é para vocês olharem. Bom, vou pular isso aqui. Deixa eu acabar minha coisa falando mais uma vez de um inglês que eu acho muito interessante, que é o Chris Smith. Ele, além de ter sido o primeiro parlamentar que chegou na House of Commons e se autodeclarou gay, ele fez muita coisa em termos de cultura e política de cultura. Então, ele veio para o Brasil, o Sayad trouxe ele para cá, e ele deu uma excelente palestra sobre a essência das políticas dele lá em 97, e é por isso que eu falei bastante em 97, porque ele, de fato, botou um pacote de política cultural para deixar muito Gilberto Gil com inveja, que era o seguinte: 4 pilares. Né? Primeiro, ele chamou de excelência, e esse é um grande desafio para qualquer política cultural, para qualquer política que queira promover indústria criativa. Qual que é a ideia? É impossível você gerar o que tem de melhor em termos de cultura e criatividade ou artes num país, se você colocar na mão de burocratas do governo ou em diretores de marketing de empresa o poder de selecionar o que é bom e o que é ruim. Então, esse é um espinho na mão de qualquer secretário ou membro de governo que mexe com cultura, mas o critério de seleção do que é bom e o que é ruim tem que ser, de alguma forma, transferido para a sociedade. Easy to say, very hard to implement. Segunda coisa, acesso. E aí ele foi radical. Falou, olha, não adianta, se renda, situação social for barreira para acesso à cultura e à arte, nós temos um problema sério. Então, precisamos gerar acesso total para toda a população. O que ele fez? Todo museu na Inglaterra é de graça. Era um dos lugares mais caros, né, na Europa. Hoje você vai na National Gallery, entra e sai. Às vezes eu fico entrando e saindo várias vezes só de sacanagem. Mas você tem qualquer um aí chega lá e usa e abusa dos museus ingleses. Terceiro ponto, e aí é delicado, né? Não sou eu que vou falar, educação. Né? Seja educação técnica, seja educação específica nos diversos subsetores, seja a nossa velha e boa educação fundamental, média, superior, pós-graduação, educação amplamente definida. E, finalmente, entender os setores. E aí entra o nosso trabalho, quer dizer, não vou mexer nem com educação, nem com acesso, nem com como é que se escolhe o que é boa arte, mas quais são os incentivos, né, para você promover indústrias criativas. Né? E, obviamente, se você tiver os três de cima indo bem, a ideia é que em metrópoles tão ricas e complexas e dinâmicas como as nossas, a gente tem um potencial enorme pela frente. Obrigado.
Podemos, antes do café, iniciar uma sessão de debate. Como vocês preferem, ou fazemos intervalo e voltamos para o debate. Depois temos um segundo módulo. Há perguntas aí engatilhadas. Então podemos passar. Professor... deixa eu ver se alguém pega. Por favor. Pode falar. Por favor. Pegar. Microfone, por favor.
Tem um aqui, ó.
Mas tem um ali. Por favor.
Wait.
Os dois palestrantes. A essa altura, vou conservar meus... Funciona? Okay. Comentário sobre a segunda palestra. Quando vou utilizar o caso de Montreal, a minha cidade, e o Florida's Ranking. Então, prefiro atualmente utilizar o idioma de Shakespeare, fazendo a minha pergunta para a nossa amiga Fiorenza. Ok, podemos switch to English? You don't need the... Fiorenza?
You don't need
I'm speaking English. Given I will deliver my lecture in English, I will train right away, the second official language of my country. As you know, Fiorenza, given my generations, the economists of my generations were introduced to industrial district in Italy more than 20 years ago, thanks to the works of Beccatini, Brusco, for instance. I met with Beccatini in a similar conference in Geneva, and we invited Brusco in Trois-Rivières in 1991 At the time, they were speaking about the so-called Third Italy. And I would like to know why you didn't refer to the Third Italy. Probably because I agree with you, things have changed a lot in the last 20 years. Famous industrial district of Prato. It was famous in the late 70s. But because, as you pointed out, because of the influence of the globalizations and, of course, the influence of China, things have changed a lot in Italy. So, according to me, all this huge literature on the Third Italy are not updated anymore. There's no use to read what was published years ago. But, given with your own conference, and given that it is still relevant to speak about industrial district in Italy, because this afternoon I will refer to one example with Sebrai. When I was in Sergipe 2 years ago, I was given 2 books on Arranjo Productivos Locais. And Sebrai did the possibilities to conduct a survey in Brazil on 8 such Arranjos Productivos Locais, or industrial district Brazilian type, thanks to a study trip in Italy. They went to Italy in 2001. They came back with new ideas, with new concept, and it seems they succeed in utilizing what you presented as for relevant studies on the situation that prevails here in Brazil. So that's a comment, but given I have got to ask a question, are you familiar to some extent, Fiorenzo, with Arranjos Productivos Locais here in Brazil? And can we compare both situations without comparing apples and oranges? That's my question.
Ok. Alguma outra pergunta dirigida à professora Fiorenza? Depois ela pode responder, acho que em bloco. A ideia é essa. Professor Fleury, please, could you pass the microphone?
Thank you for your presentation, Fiorenza. My question is, I think, from somebody who's still working with this pure and sable type of literature. But the first point that you mentioned as a key feature of the industrial district is the socio-economic structure. With all these changes, this specific feature is still maintained. How did it evolve? Eu gostaria também de fazer comentário para o Danilo. Existe outro trabalho do Flórida sobre as megametrópoles, ou coisa que o valha, né? Ele reorganiza os espaços e diz que quem não estiver nesses 20 megametrópoles não vai estar envolvido no que vai acontecer daí para frente. Quer dizer, e nesse caso, São Paulo e Rio de Janeiro ocupam uma posição de destaque nisso, não? Quer dizer, existe uma ideia de que São Paulo e Rio de Janeiro realmente são a liderança das indústrias criativas no Brasil, num plano mais internacional. Não? E aí um comentário rápido, essa questão do onde é que a gente fica naquele ranking lá no 43º. Eu tenho 2 sobrinhos que estão na área de publicidade, são muito bons, e os 2 já foram puxados para a Inglaterra e para os Estados Unidos para trabalhar nas matrizes, né, das empresas. E a história é o seguinte: qualquer equipe de de criação, precisa ter um brasileiro para gerar ideias e alguém que não é brasileiro para fazer o projeto funcionar.
Bom, eu acredito que, para a gente não dispersar aí as questões, encaminhar as respostas, depois, se houver novas questões, a gente abre novamente ao público. Professora Ferenza? Yes.
I will start to answer. Is working. I will start to answer shifting from using the same order of the question. You asked me two things mainly. First, why you didn't refer to the third Italy model, and secondly, are industrial districts, Italian industrial districts, in some way similar or different to Brazilian industrial district or local production system? Regarding the third question, I think that there is an important aspect which is embedded in the history of after war in economic growth. And this aspect is that, and I will quote it here, an interesting article of Phelps published on Urban Studies, refer to the geography of Banal. The geography of Banal is the geography of intermediate areas. And in this article there are many interesting quotations, and one is from Amin and Trift, article 2003. And the words are the following: economic organization now is irremediably distributed. Even when economic activity seems to be spatially clustered, a close inspection will reveal that the clusters rely on a multiplicity of sites, institutions, and connections which actually constitute them. And this idea of borrowed size, of the let's say, the development that go out from the bottle and spread around is something that has been observed in the case of Italian districts in the 50s. And at the beginning, it was considered as a large geographical dispersion of development. And for this reason, this has been called Third Italy, because it was, in one sense, creating an area that was in the middle between the well-developed First Industrial Revolution area and three regions, Lombardy, Piemonte, and Liguria, and the underdeveloped South. And I think this process, in one way or another, has occurred in every country, that the original sites of First Industrial Revolution were, let's say, in Detroit in the car industry, Manchester in UK, or Turin and Lombardy in Italy. But then a lot of activities spread around. So, but I didn't refer nowadays to the Third Italy, simply because this is considered something that already was occurred in the past. And now that we take a closer inspection, we like to see a kind of more detailed figure, which has been seen, provided for our creative industry, where they are, where they close, concentrated, more in London. You could see the important city of UK. You could see London, you could see Edinburgh on the north, and so on. So, in fact, I think the Third Italy is something obvious in the culture, in economic culture nowadays. But what is not obvious is the destiny of industrial districts. Because, I mean, Italians are very worried. Why? Why a lot of Italians are interested in understanding the evolution of industrial districts? Because we know that in Britain, between the 1930 and 40, they disappear, which in the case of Italian, it means that we are going to lose something like 2 million of workers and probably 100,000 firms. So for this reason, I mean, we are in this kind of second area of globalization, we are a little bit worried. And we are taking close inspection where firms are, where they delocalize, how many jobs we lose, how many new activities we gain, and so on. Prato in the Beccatini story is a quintessence of the model of industrial district. And I'm a friend of Beccatini. I'm also participated to his last, probably he's also very old, he's 87, so probably will be really his last book or his last big book on the Encyclopedia of Industrial District, published by Elgar. I try not to study Prato, not to refer to Prato, because in my view, Beccatini looked at Prato with the Martian eyes, and look at Prato too much, and he, in one sense, give to international audience the idea that the industrial district is just one model. And this, in my view, was wrong, because he undervaluated the sources of diversity. And but now Prato has changed. Recent work on Prato are describing Prato as a district which start to delocalize, like a district in the Veneto region, which were much more dynamic than the district for Tuscany, because Veneto enjoyed very much of the Berlin Wall failure. So our firms had very near low-cost countries, while if you look at the geography of Italy, Veneto region is the east region, while Tuscany is nearly in the center of Italy. So in the case of Italy, the process of delocalization was touching our districts in the Veneto region much more than in Tuscany, for geographical reason. Because after '89, it was very simple to take a truck and to put shoes to be manufactured in Romania, or it was called one-day travel. So if you look at the area of delocalization, what is exactly related to the number of hours that the truck can use to go from one place to another. In Prato was different. So Prato delocalized later on, but nowadays Prato is delocalizing exactly like in the district I mentioned. And this means that instead of having 40,000 employees in textile, nowadays Prato has something between 8,000 and 12,000, depending on how you count artisan and entrepreneurs and so on. Self-employer, which are also entrepreneurs. Another important feature of Prato, so Prato is in decline, but because delocalization is not a decline related to decline of activities. But the second characteristic is that Prato also adopted the inverse delocalization, so imported Chinese. And nowadays there are in Prato something like 20,000 Chinese working in clothing activity. That's a new story. While Prato was specializing in textile, Chinese are now specializing in clothing, because they also they can offer low-cost labor, which in Italy is, in Italy, I know that there is no one Chinese that died. And because Chinese are black market. By definition, Italians are not able to distinguish. They can sell passport to everyone. And also, they are typically working in illegal conditions. Illegal for Italians, but legal for China. I mean, they are adopting Chinese style, so they sleep in the factory. They are a little bit slaves and so on. I mean, very nasty story. We Italians are very worried also because nowadays, first because the Italian police is not able to solve the problem and to control this phenomenon, and secondly because there is no integration. I mean, the Chinese community is totally separated from the Italian community. But Chinese are the inverse delocalization and the import of low-cost labor in the districts. So clothing activity have been developing related to the made in Italy sector. So you have this apparently paradox that the big firma in clothing, not in shoes, is Brenta. Brenta is producing shoes for Valentino, Armani and Prada, but the clothes are produced in Tuscany, and many Chinese firms are involved in this. But again, this is a kind of borrowed side phenomenon. There is not anymore Chinese firms are in Tuscany. They're not anymore in the district. So you have again an economic dispersion of activity. And districts are, external economies are moving, from the fixed district to the so-kind region. So you have a kind of local system which are larger nowadays. External economies and local system are not, in Tuscany, are not anymore districts, but are related to the kind of ample province, local system based on province more than on small cities, and they are related to high-value activities of Prada, design, and the more costly made in Italy fashion. The second question, your second question, was related to the identification of the model of industrial district in comparison with different local production systems. I think a lot of the Italian industrial district, the story of Italian industrial district has a lot to do with labor mobility. Why you don't have so many traditional industrial districts in the United States? Because labor is much mobile than in Italy. In Italy, it's typically, a lot of you are Italians, but you are part of a different story of Italy. It was a story of poverty, of immigration. But it was a story of 19th century, when Italians immigrated in the United States, in South America, and so on. And it has been calculated that something like 25 million of Italians are not living in Italy. And Italy has 56 million inhabitants. But the Italian tradition for people that remain in Italy, or for the families that remain in Italy, is that you will never move yourself. So while in America labor mobility is normal, in Italy everyone asks me, where are you from? And they mean that where are you born, where do you live, where your parents live. And when I'm saying to them, I'm born in the mountains in a region, but then I was living in another city, then I have moved to Venice, now I'm teaching in Padua. People remain, which is really in 200 kilometers, but they remain surprised because I moved myself 200 kilometers. And so the Italians tend to live there. So Italian districts are so concentrated in few municipalities because people tend to live in a place, tend to absorb the local capability, the local knowledge, the tacit knowledge in the air, and so they tend to rebuild, retransfer, reutilize that knowledge. So labor mobility in Italy is something negative. It's because you pay more for apartments if you want an apartment. But if you stay there, you can have an apartment of your relatives, or you can rent for a very cheap price. But if you go to Milan, you pay a lot. So clearly, we are modern, so we have been the metropolitan area of Italy are Rome and Milan and Naples, perhaps. But a lot of development in Italy is local. In one sense, this is very similar to at least some part of Brazil that I know, which is the south part of Italy, of Brazil. But the districts, the so-called districts of Brazil, local production system, which are specialized in one activity, and districts are a very exception of a local system, because typically a local system are the dominant presence is diversity of sector. It's not just a specialization in one sector. But even if in Italy the specialization is not so common, in Brazil they tend to be smaller in size, smaller in the number of employees, smaller in the number of firms, and they tend not to specialize so much. And probably they didn't grow in the right time when Demagro was in post-war. They are less innovative, so many of the districts have created very, radical breakthrough new technologies, and so they increased competitiveness, and they could export, and they could become firms could become larger and so on. And I don't know many stories about that. The district that I know, because I've been collaborating with some researchers here, are the tiles districts of Santa Caterina, and these districts are the most similar to Italy, but they are not in the global division of labor. They are using the knowledge created in Italy because they are always buying Italian machinery. They don't have producer of machinery in the district. While in Italian districts, in many, I didn't have the time to talk about everyone, but typically when the district grows very much, it produces also a small sector of machinery, like in Vicenza, in tanning. The tanning district of Vicenza benefits a lot from the tanning machinery sector, which is, let's say, 20 firms and 500 employees. But it's a lot because they introduce novelty, and the first firms to use this novelty are the firms of the district. And then they sell to competitors outside. So they can gain a competitive advantage. So in one sense, the localization economies, Marshallian localization economies, which is technological externalities, are stronger in Italy than in Brazil. Local districts in Brazil or local specialized systems are less dynamic technologically than I've seen in Italy. But honestly, this is more a field of new studies, of new research that is just an observation. That's a scientific proof. Referring to your question, where are the important, let's say, diversion of the pattern? Let's take the two districts, for instance, sports system of Montebelluna and footwear districts of Riviera del Brenta near Venice. You can see that both, if you look at the first firms, you could have ancient craft tradition, because in the case of Montebelluna, they start to build a competence producing sport boots for the mountains. They were located near the mountains. And then the First War, they produced the boots for the Italian Alpini in the First War against Austria. And so they start to be specialized in this production. In the case of Riviera del Brenta, the ancient traditions are in the Republic of Venice, which was a state for 1,000 years, a rich state because commerce with the Orient, and it gives rise to a class of creative noble. A creative noble like to have funny shoes. And the first, in fact, Venetian invented the tacchi, the wheels, and the shoes were very sophisticated. So there is a tradition of shoes which were not manufactured in Venice, but in the area near Venice. Riviera del Brenta is exactly near Venice. And there is a river, il Brenta, which links Padua to Venice, and the district is exactly developed around the river, which connects Padua to Venice. And still now the district is half in the Padua province and half in the Venice province. So the ancient tradition, they have a meaning in Italy. I don't know if in Brazil you have ancient tradition like this, because these two districts goes back. The first firm is in 1989 in both districts, so more than 100 years, the first firm, which has a name because it was Calzatorificio Voltan in Riviera del Brenta, was, I don't remember the name of Montebelluna, but I have in my writings. What's happened? In the case of Riviera del Brenta, new knowledge was brought in the district through immigration. So Voltan was immigrant in the United States. He took the new machinery, German new machinery adopted there, which was a kind of industrialization of the production, like moving chain and so on, and they brought in Italy, and he transferred the technology, and he started up the firm and then the district. Then in the district, they never make important innovation, so you have them and grow and local institution, because immediately in the first years of 19, they built up a school for pattern makers for design. So even nowadays, the strongest of this district, it is produce, you have a wonderful school, you produce disegnatori and pattern makers, modellisti, which are able to go from a conceptualization of design to a real shoes. And they also, these people work nowadays for company in Spain, in Portugal, and in the world. So in one sense, it creates also competence that are used in other districts and against these districts. But local institutions were very important in creating a sector that was very innovative in the product, in the design of the product. On the contrary, Montebelluna, a clear deviation was when one entrepreneur, Nordica, the owner of Nordica, decided to go from leather boots to plastic boots. He used a patent done, which he observed done in the United States, but he manufactured using the capability of the district. In the past, they were able, in the district, mountain boots were done with a big sole of Vibram, which was an Italian patent. So they produced machinery to make, to use plastic. In the States, when Lange was the inventor, decided to go from leather to plastic, he didn't have this technology. So he made a plastic boot, which was very fragile and it could not be industrialized. The entrepreneur in Montebelluna, together with a firm called Lorenzetti from Padua, they were producing the machinery for Vibram soil, use a new plastics to make the boots in plastics, which was a polyurethano, and they produce a new machinery, you are an engineer, you know better than me, by injection instead of by fusion of plastic. And that was the real important marginal innovation that make the production possible. The big production possible, because at that time, I'm talking about 70s, in Montebelluna, you could, the production of plastic mountain ski boots were 8 million per year. So they industrialized drastically, like Ford in 1904 with the famous Model T. So they started to have mass production. So this district, with this a lot of new technologies came up. For instance, something that is trivial, but they moved from the boots with the rope, the boots closed by metallic closure, which is much more stable, and so on. So you can see that even districts which have the same triggering factor at the origin, they have deviation. One more innovative, one goes to technological issue, another goes to design activities and so on. And these are two sustainable patterns. So, Florian, what is important in my view is that even in Brazil, you develop the creativity of the local people. There are no, let's say, if you want to develop a district, you have to do this, do that. But there are very different possibilities, window of opportunities open to developing a district. Because many Italian districts are not just innovative, but they use a lot of differentiation and diversification. For instance, one district from Lombardy started producing shoes, men's shoes, and now is producing machinery for shoes. Because shoes are in China, and I produce the machinery. Or you can say differentiation. In Montebelluna, they start to apply the technology for ski boots. When everyone has bought a ski boots, they say, but you can go to walk. And so they start to make shoes, climbing shoes, and calcio, football shoes for cycling. So they apply the same technology with small differentiation, but in different, totally different markets. So there is a lot of possibilities open also to Brazilian district in this sense. Probably you can have a similar factor. We can have ancient tradition. You can also have multinational coming here. The reality, I visited Sinos Valley, but the reality is that the firms there, they are very weak. I mean, there are no entrepreneurs, no institution that make design. There are no, so if you don't have anything, you cannot open if you just compete on labor cost, you are dead nowadays. You are dead. Because China's, but tomorrow India and perhaps you will always find a new country that has a lower labor cost. Then South Africa, then they can enter Kenya. So you need to try to use the local resources to create on the basis of local resources something, or to import resources from outside. You can ask multinational to come. Probably the car industry in Brazil is related to exogenous development. So multinational came here, but you have institution, university produce engineers, so you could have a local development.
Okay. Legal. Deixa eu só então ser breve. Bom, eu respondendo a pergunta do professor Fleury, ou o comentário do professor Fleury, eu acho que essas previsões, assim, de que ou você está dentro das 20 megalópolis nos próximos anos, ou está morto, né, mais ou menos isso, na indústria criativa, eu acho que é um pouco forte demais. O que a gente vai ver é uma concentração. No Brasil não tem dúvida de que o Rio e São Paulo, né, só com esses números preliminares a gente já vê a importância, né. Agora, tem que olhar algumas nuances, eu acho. Eu acho que tem espaço. O que é um tamanho suficiente para gerar indústrias criativas robustas que compitam no mercado global? Ainda acho que está por ser determinado, porque o papel da internet, né, e das comunicações está totalmente em aberto nesses setores. Olha a música, por exemplo, né, que é um que está bastante na mídia. O impacto da internet na indústria da música é impressionante, né, para o bem e para o mal. E aí outros setores estão chegando nisso, né. Então, por exemplo, o polo de softwares em Recife é uma experiência muito interessante que talvez gere uma coisa única no Brasil, né, essa coisa dos jogos de computador. Agora, não tem dúvida, né, que isso é desde a Renascença na Itália, né, quer dizer, os polos que concentram artistas migram, tem uma mobilidade maior normalmente do que os não artistas, né, vão atrás de outros artistas. Não sei, talvez vocês tenham que me dizer o que acontece com os engenheiros. A gente precisa ter casamento de engenheiro com artista. Eu paro por aqui.
Bom, eu confesso que eu também tinha aqui algumas questões que para mim são muito relevantes, mas eu vou propor que a gente faça uma parada para um café, e acho que isso não impede que a gente continue conversando aí no espaço mais restrito entre as pessoas, né? Mas enfim, um momento de convivência mais próximo aí. Convido então para uma parada no café. Muito obrigado.
Congratulations.
Okay.